Welcome to the Cool Explorations podcast and radio program with your host, Tony Peters. I hope you'll enjoy today's segment. Welcome to Cool Explorations. I know we've missed a week here. We had some people cancel on us, but we are back, and we are today with Katie Cruice Smith. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. I have a tendency. Thank you. I usually have a tendency to screw up names, so I'm glad I got that one right. We're going to be discussing her book, Why Did You Choose Me? Which involves adoption, as well as some would tie in with foster parenting and stuff like that. So really, really great topic and subject for us to be covering, especially as Christians, as we are commanded to love and care for the least of these. And children are included in that. We see how much Jesus Christ loved children just so much by how much he invited them to come to him all the time, even though the disciples would try and rush them off, as adults often do. Why don't we start off by just getting you just to tell us a little bit about who you are, and what you do, what your family situation looks like as well.
Okay. Yes, thanks for having me. I am an adoptive mom. We adopted our first child back in 2008. And then a couple of years later, her birth mom called us and said, I'm going to have another baby. Do you want this one? And we said yes. And then 3 years later, she called us again and we said yes. And each one of them has a really just a cool adoption story of how God made that happen, because we were not prepared for any of them, and we didn't have a budget. And we just watched God lead us through those doors. We have always wanted to adopt. My husband and I, when we were dating, actually worked in a ministry in our church where we would go into the poorer parts of our city and bring in kids who, for whatever reason, were less fortunate. And some of them didn't even know when they left church to go home who would be home with them. And a lot of times we were with the first graders, the 6-year-olds, and a lot of times they would beg us just to take them home with us, and really got a hold of our hearts. And we said, what can we do? How can we help these kids? So we got really started looking into what that means, being foster parents, being adoption advocates. And then there was a family in our church who actually worked at a boys' home, and they would come with these teenage boys who were from all walks of life, had all different kinds of issues related to what they had been through in their lives. And we never knew which ones were their actual biological sons and which ones they were family. And I was friends with a lot of them. And I was just so impacted by their compassion for these kids. And so I always had it on my heart. But when we got married, we thought, well, we'll probably have like a biological kid or two, and then we'll dabble in foster care and see what God does. But I ended up struggling with infertility related to, I have Graves' disease. And so stuff started coming out that was very serious and affected a lot of my health. And so God closed that door, and we were like, well, do we start the adoption process now? What do we do? We went to our pastor. We talked to him about it. We got a lot of counseling, and we started working with an agency here in town, and they were going through a major upheaval of their staff, and they weren't going to be able to even work with anybody for another year and a half. And we had already been trying 5 years of trying to become parents. That's all we wanted to do. And I was working for an attorney at the time whose former assistant had worked with an adoption attorney. And he said, I want you to talk to her. And he called her for me and made me do it while I was on the clock so he could make sure I followed up with it. And so we met with our adoption attorney, and he just was he's just so experienced. He's an adoptive dad himself. And within just 3 months of retaining him, we were matched with this birth mother, and I fell in love with her. We consider her, we have a semi-open adoption. So we've sent letters over the years and pictures, but we don't really see we don't talk to her. The kids haven't really seen her or anything like that, but we have the channels open. And I just started feeling more and more like God was calling me to be there for other adoptive parents, but also to speak for the birth moms, because a lot during our adoption, a lot of people were saying, you say things that are insensitive, and um, so God kind of led me down this road. And now I work part-time for our adoption attorney, actually, as his marketing assistant, because
Oh,
I
cool.
just really felt like God wanted me to be a part of the adoption community and not just somebody who adopted and then moved on with my life. So I go to events, the adoption events, and I speak at those, or I represent our attorney and have like a table, and people come up and talk to me about it. I talk through grants and loans and different ways to fundraise for your adoption. Um, and in the meantime, we have three beautiful children at home, 15, 12, and 9 now. And we did a summer where we were respite foster care parents. So if there was, we were the parents who were getting called at 3 a.m. and they'd say, we don't have anywhere for this kid to go. Can you guys take them? And we would take them until they could find a more permanent situation. So we've had 10 of those kids. Um, and then we had to close our doors. We've moved, and just some different life changes. God closed that door for us. But we did start at our former church. We founded and ran for 5 years an orphan ministry. So we were trying to get the church more involved. I have a passion for the church taking back the orphan ministry. I think we have let government get too involved,
Yeah.
and I think it's very important for these kids to know that the church cares about them. And so I go around and I speak to people about that, and some people run from me, especially during the month of November, which is National Adoption Month. I tend to be like, well, what are you doing? And I firmly believe not everybody can adopt, and not everybody can be a foster parent, but there are ways that you can be involved and support adoptive and foster families, and support the birth moms. Not every situation is not the same. And for a while, I was the birth mom liaison for our adoption attorney. So I was working one on one with these mothers who had not a single one of them had the exact same reason, but for why they were placing their child for adoption. So I'm just very passionate about spreading the word. I mean, there's in the world, there's over 30 million um, kids that are without a family. And so we need to do something that the church needs to do something about that. It's a crisis that shouldn't be.
Yeah, and sadly, a lot of them end up in slavery situations,
Yes,
um, whether that's sex slavery or work slavery. Um,
exactly.
they end up in those kind of positions, and when they grow up, they're still stuck in that. So it is definitely something that we do need to take very seriously.
Mhm.
Um, and I did work in a group home for a couple of years, and yeah, it was
Oh,
just
wow.
it was very hard seeing kids whose parents wouldn't show up
Yeah.
for appointments, and or they you just see a lot of the like, fetal alcohol syndrome. We had a kid who
Yes.
had that, and he was a big he was only 13, but he was big.
Yeah.
And so he definitely struggled with a lot of anger, and
Sure.
it was calming him down and knowing when to back off and
Hmm.
get somebody else to step in with him. And so it definitely takes the right person when you're doing foster care to
Yeah.
to know how to handle those kind of situations, and uh,
Yes.
kids with all kinds of different temperaments and backgrounds, and trying to understand where they've come from.
Right.
Because you often don't know the abuse that they've maybe gone through or struggles that they've gone through. So
Absolutely.
it's great to keep those kind of things in mind. We do have a couple in our church who does foster, and they are working to adopt their son. He has health
Hmm.
issues like a lot,
Okay.
so they haven't been they've been pleased that he hasn't been moved around over
Yeah.
the years, because once they found him their match with him, they just kept them with them because it was
Yes.
really hard to place him elsewhere because he had to be fed with a tube.
Oh,
And
wow.
now he can semi eat on his own.
Right.
But it's taken a lot of work and time with them, and now they're working to adopt him. So
Wow.
he does have some native. He's mostly native, so
Okay.
they are really struggling to go through the adoption process because of that.
Yes.
Um,
That
but
creates another element, definitely.
yeah, and the native liaison they've been dealing with is like, we don't really like to have our native children adopted because
Mm.
we get government kickbacks for having
Right.
kids in fosters. So the native reserve actually gets kickback for
Hmm.
their kid being in foster care. So they like to keep them in foster care. I'm like, well, that's not thinking about the child at all. You're thinking
No,
about your pocketbooks instead
exactly.
of trying to do what's best for the kid.
Yes.
They do think that this is going to go through, but they've been told this is probably the last native adoption that they're going to be seeing.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so that it just kind of puts in mind, just into perspective, how important fostering and adoption really is, and that it shouldn't be something about financial. It should be about what can I do that's going to be helping
Right. Exactly.
this child. And
Yes.
that, as Christians, that should be the attitude we should have. It's not, this is going to be financially beneficial for me, a little
Right.
money on the side. No,
It's
it's
definitely not financially successful.
no. And when you're given money, oftentimes it's supposed, most of the time it's spent on the kid, trying to
Right.
trying to feed them.
Exactly.
That's why you're getting the money, is to help
Exactly.
feed and clothe and put supplies on with the kid, with the child that you're taking
Exactly.
care of. So definitely an important subject. One, my wife and I, we've considered adoption, with my son having so many health issues and my own health issues, that hasn't really been viable for us.
Right.
But it's something that we've always wanted to do since we were dating. We've
Yeah.
always wanted to work at an orphanage in Africa.
Oh,
We
yeah.
we'd been planning that for a while before my health kibosh that. Uh,
Right.
that was God closing a door, telling us that that wasn't His plan for us. But we've always
Right.
kept in mind that we'd love to adopt a child from Africa, or
Hmm.
one of those countries, like that, even a
Yeah.
Hispanic country, just to provide a home for these kids that wouldn't have a better life otherwise.
Right.
And I do think it's also important to keep in mind how many children in Canada and the US that actually are without homes or without proper care at home.
Right.
You look at the single parent, how many households are single parent households?
Yeah.
They're not oftentimes getting both parents, the
Right.
influence from both, and they need a male and female role model that they can
Yeah.
get influence from, so they can learn about both sides of things. Mothers
Exactly.
tend to teach a lot more about the sensitivity side of things,
Yeah.
and with my wife, more the financial side of things.
Yeah.
So it's good to have the influence of both parents.
Right.
And for homes that are homosexual, it is still good to have two parent influence, in terms
Yes.
of that. So both personalities contributing to the household. Um,
Absolutely.
so I do really think it's important what you've been doing, what you've been speaking on. Um, we kind of covered why adoption is important to you.
Hmm.
Obviously, with your health stuff, that is definitely a good reason for that, and that's often a reason why many people get into adoption,
Right.
and foster care. Uh, what is your testimony, your walk with God? What does that look like leading up to the point where you've been now, or where you've started adopting and foster care?
Well, I've grown up in a Christian home. My dad is a pastor at a local church. He's one of the assistant pastors. And so I've grown up in a Christian school, went to a Christian college, um, where our church is very involved with orphan ministry, as far as like the boys' home. Um, there's a local organization here that focuses on all aspects, helps the birth moms, helps the orphans, helps people who need to be in rehab. They kind of do all of it. So our church has always supported them, supported local pro-life groups and stuff like that. So I feel like I've kind of always grown up in that. Um, but I was saved when I was 5. And so I think that God has just always put this heart in me that to care for others as he has cared for me. And, you know, some people don't like it when you compare the adoption of us by God to adoption of children, because it almost makes it sound like as adoptive parents are their saviors. And that's not true at all. But I think that the beauty is that we can see there's a brokenness in our system that says these children cannot be raised in their biological family and they need to be raised by a healthy home. I think I think when we compare that to what God did to us, it just makes it seem even more wonderful, the adoption God offers to us to become his sons and daughters
Mm-hmm.
and to accept that gift. And in the same way, these children of mine, you know, they have to, I'm adopting them and legally I'm their mother and legally my husband's their father, but they have to accept that gift. I mean, they have to say, yes, I will also claim you as my mom and dad. I will, you know, not call you Katie and Jamie. I will call you mom and dad. I will accept the gift that you are giving to me to be your heirs and to learn from you and to accept your love. So there's, I think, there's a 2-part thing of us being able to see the grace God gives, but also to know that we are not their saviors. We are blessed to be able to be their parents. God has given them to us. And um, I think like with each of their stories, God has shown me more clearly how he's going to provide for us. If he wants a child in our home, then he made a way for them to be here. And each of their stories is there's no way any of my children should be with us. If you saw our finances when we were going through the adoption process, adoption, especially private adoption, extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And just raising children, anybody who has children knows they're expensive and they require food daily and clothing.
And you would think that would get a little cheaper as they get older, but it actually gets more
No.
expensive as they get older. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but yeah, God has just shown us through, you know, strangers have sent money. They heard our story and they sent money for my son's adoption, that we had gotten to the point where we thought God is closing this door. There's no more money. There's no way we can move forward. And, you know, then all of a sudden I had like these emails from people who were like, I had no idea who they were. And they just sent money and it was, you know, enough to cover expenses, the next expenses. And I think God just made it so clear, like, this is not your plans. These are my plans. So you can't do anything about this. I'm going to take this on. And even just the fact that I'm a mother, when I was told that I was infertile and I wasn't going to be able to birth children, that God said, well, in Psalms, he says that he makes the barren woman the joyous mother of children. And that's me. I am the barren woman who is the joyous mother of children. And I tell people I have 13 children, even though I only have 3 who live with me now, because those other 10 children, they came in, they grabbed my heart. And even if they were only with me for 24 hours, they're always going to be a part of me and a part of, and even if I only had 24 hours to love on them and pour Christ into them, that was 24 hours that they wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think that God through my life has just shown himself so faithful, and I'm so thankful for how he provides for families, and I think no family is the same as another, and we get these ideas from television and stuff that there has to be a certain family structure and this is how it is. And I think God says, no, I created families. I want your family to look this way. And so I might not look like your family, but my family is pretty cool. So
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't realize the impact that we can have on children, and how that impacts them growing up
Yeah.
throughout that. And it's wonderful to have adoption and foster care as an option, but it's so sad to see what the government has done with it and how they've really ruined the program
Yes, for sure.
by making it more expensive. The adoption
Yeah.
process, especially anytime you get lawyers and government involved, especially mixed, uh,
Yes.
it, the price adds up pretty quick. When there's so many families that need homes,
Yes.
uh, or kids that need homes and need families, it's it's really sad to see how expensive it is. And that's one thing that's always really bothered my wife and I, is how expensive it is to
Right.
adopt a child when there's so many kids who could benefit from a home, but these
Right.
people who would give them homes can't afford it. And
Right.
it ends up making it so there's less kids being adopted, which means more
Mhm.
kids stuck in the system being
Right.
bounced from home to home.
Yes.
Which is another thing that's always bothered us about foster care, is that they get bounced from home to home. And it's like,
Me too.
you'd be better if they just stayed in a home where they
Right.
can have that family structure. They can feel like
Mhm.
they're wanted, not wondering what's the next place going to be like, what's the
Right.
next school going to be like, how am I going to make friends? Like
Exactly.
let them get settled into a proper structure and
Yeah.
not worrying about when they're going to be shuffled off to the next home. Uh,
Right. Absolutely. And I will say one of the misconceptions about private adoption is that it's the attorneys that are overcharging. But I
it's
happen to know personally it's not the attorneys. A lot of the laws as far as what the birth parents can ask for, a lot of expenses, that tends to be a lot. Trying to match, if you have to use like a matching service, the amount of money the matching services ask to connect you with a birth mom are astronomical. Um, it's usually the attorney is the smallest expense of all of it, and you want somebody who knows the law, so
yeah,
that and my attorney especially, that was something we really looked for. He has worked at changing the law in our state to try to make it more accessible, because there was so much red tape when he was adopting his girls, who are my age now. And he said, this is ridiculous. We got to change some stuff. So he's done some things that are really good. Um, but there's still so much red tape, and all of that red tape you have to get through
yeah,
costs money, because there's somebody behind it who has to be paid for the time that they're putting into it.
yeah,
So I do try to deconstruct that a little bit for people, that it's not the attorney himself or herself. It's the home study fees, the background checks, and all of that stuff that goes into it.
yeah, yeah. The government definitely, they know how to milk every dollar out of every situation.
Yes.
Um, and and I do think it's very sad,
Mhm.
because there's so many people who would provide loving homes,
Right.
and they
Absolutely.
can't. So I think that kind of gets us into what inspired you to write the kids book that you wrote, the picture book. Why did you choose me? Can you
Mhm.
just explain a little bit more what kind of inspired that book to be
Yeah.
written?
Well, when we were presented with the opportunity to adopt my third child, we had nothing at that point, and we just didn't know how God was going to provide. So I was trying to find different ways. And I went on Pinterest of all things, and was looking for adoption grants. And there was a couple, I think they lived in Maine, somewhere in New England, that I don't know if they had adopted themselves. I'm not really sure their story, but they had decided that each year they were going to have an essay contest for adoptive parents, and they would choose a different topic each year, and they would award $1,000 just out of their own money. They just were very generous. And so the topic that year was, if your child comes to you one day and said, why did you choose me? What would you say? And so I wrote an essay about that, was basically a love letter to my child about why I chose them and why I wanted to be their mom. And I won the grant. So it was a wonderful grant. And then I had a friend who is a local art teacher, and she's always brainstorming with me. And she was actually teaching me how to garden. So I was up at her little farm and learning how to garden. And I was just kind of complaining, like my heart, I was pouring my heart out to her and saying, I'm so frustrated because God presents me with this baby, but I don't know how to like raise enough money to bring her into my home. What do I do? I'm torn. I want my kids to stay with their biological siblings if they can. What do I do? And she's like, well, you won that essay. She's like, let's turn it into a book. I'll do the illustrations for you. And and then let's figure out how to sell this and raise money for your adoption. Well, that seemed like a great idea. And Sarah Strickling Jones is her name, and she's fabulous. But neither one of us had any kind of publishing experience, even though I have a degree in publishing. I didn't have any experience getting a book published. And so we talked to a few people, and they were like, well, raise $15,000 and publish it on your own. And I said, well, that's kind of defeating the point. If I had $15,000, I would be putting that into my adoption, not into this book to raise money. So it actually ended up sitting on my shelf for about 4 years. And then a good friend of mine that I grew up with, she became COO of a small Christian publishing company here in town. And she's like, as my first project, I want to take on your book, and I'm going to talk to our publisher about you. And so Dr. Sam Lowry is our publisher, and he said, I think you have a compelling story because it's not just about it's not just a cute picture book. There's a story behind it. You have a passion to share with others and to be an encouragement to the adoption and foster community. And so he took it on, and I actually work for them now. I'm their senior editor now. It has kind of spiraled into a job for me, but he has been super supportive of my book. And so that's kind of, it answers the questions. Oh, I changed some things because, it was 4 years later. So my baby that hadn't been born yet was now 4 years old and had an opinion about the book. So, and the other two had opinions. So those questions are actually, based on their lives. And, there is a mess behind closet doors. And, they do always try to do tricks and impress me with what they can do. And I think children everywhere need to know, like, it's not really about what you do or any of that. It's just because of who you are. You're a child that God gave to me, and you're precious in his sight, and you're precious to me. And I just wanted them to hear that. And so it's still their favorite book, even the 15-year-old who doesn't think I'm so cool anymore. she still loves it. And so I'm really excited when I meet people who say, oh, my kids love this. This was so impactful in our home. Our local child welfare department has used it. They give it out to some of their families. My adoption attorney is like my number one customer. He'll keep it and give it out to new clients and stuff like that. So, I just wanted to reach kids. And my kids were a little frustrated because there were so many like bunny books out there about adoption, or the pandas adopted by, lions and that kind of thing. And they were like, well, where are the books where we are in? Like we want to be seen. We look different. And so actually my illustrator friend drew kids in that book that looked like my kids to make it
cool.
unique and special for them.
Yeah, I have a couple of, I have several books published actually myself, self-published, most of them. And one of the picture books we did together as a family was Colors of Fall. So it was just explaining all the different colors that you see during fall. And I tied in my kids, their pictures, and my own photography. Every picture in there is pictures that I took. And it's got my kids as a main feature in there, and they absolutely love that book. I know the publishing process can be quite a headache at times. I enjoyed self-publishing more than I did going through a publisher. I did I went through a publisher once, and I decided just to self-publish after that. All my books
Yeah.
have made money, but didn't make me rich by any means.
Yes.
But that Colors of Fall book, we also turned into Spanish because my sister-in-law is from Guatemala.
Oh,
So
wow.
so she had some influence in that book as well. And she wanted me just to take all the profits and everything from it. And I'm like, no, anything I get from it, you could have. You put the
Oh, yeah.
Spanish stuff into it. Um, but it just kind of made it more of a family project, which was kind of fun, like you say, and showing the kids' personality through the
Right.
book, something that they can feel like they're a part of.
Right.
And so I love that aspect of it. And just want to make sure people know where to find you. Where can they find your book online, and about you?
You can find it on Amazon. It's sold through my publisher on ambassador-international.com. Anywhere, any major booksellers, Christian book distributors, Barnes and Noble, trying to think of all of them, but anywhere books are sold, you can find it. You can find me. You can follow my Facebook page. It's Katie Cruice Smith. That's Cruice like juice, Cruice. Editor, author/author. I'm on Goodreads as Katie Cruice Smith. Instagram, author Katie Smith. I'm on Alignable now as Katie Cruice Smith, editor/writer. Or you can go on follow my website, www.katiecruisesmith.com.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Explorations podcast and radio program. I hope that you've enjoyed today's segment, and I hope that you'll consider supporting us at Cool Explorations on Patreon, as well as you can shoot me an email at tpeters745@gmail.com if you'd like to support in other ways other than Patreon.